The Jetsons, Archie, issue 5. Spacely takes George to lunch, and it's the fanciest bistro in the universe, just to fire him. And he at least apologizes, explaining that he's lost his biggest account. If he's got less money, it makes no sense that he threw some away, bringing him to a fancy restaurant. Why does George waste time telling Jane that nothing is wrong and being stupid before telling her the truth? He despairs, and she convinces him to look for a job anyways. He looks at the want ads on a tablet and goes up to a place for a job, and eventually says he could sell the cleaning system the guy tried to sell him. He's told he'll get almost no pay. Then it's completely forced that he's gonna take the job. He's told to drive far away, and despite being shocked at it, he happily agrees. I wish it was a story about him having a second job. That'd be less depressing than him being fired. Then the guy used a device to get rid of the dirty molecules in the room to demonstrate it to George, even though he doesn't have to do that when it's probably wasting its energy. He lands on a planet and doesn't think of an alien as a person, even far into the future. And after a lot of people slam their doors on him, someone invites him in. He uses the device, and the alien wonders where the room is, and it turns out he completely ruined his house. There's no reason the device would have been provided to salesmen to sell then. They'd know it's impossibly faulty. You'd think George would have been shown this problem after it was demonstrated to him. He gets chased and hides, and when he finds out a kid got trapped because someone tried to fix his car here, he wants to help. And the kid goes into his device with the car. When he sends the car back out, the kid's on top of the vehicle and conveniently unharmed despite being pinned down by a car before. By a wild coincidence, it turns out he's talking to the guy who owns Space Seltzer, so he agrees to bring his account back to Spacely. I still don't know why he gave up on him earlier. It must have been for a petty reason, because if it was for a good business reason, this wouldn't convince him. Then George is brave enough to make another demand, which is that Spacely has to go door-to-door as salesman with that screwy device for a month. It would have been more satisfying karma if I got to see him experience that a little. And besides, he didn't do anything wrong in this issue. The opposite, actually. And George is smart enough to not tell him why he's being expected to do that. In the next story, someone at a place conveniently named Astro Park, which for some reason has no explanation, says training starts today. And it's the time of year when Space Scouts train for the Jamboree to decide the world's best troop. And it's George in charge of them for no reason. As if he doesn't have a job. Maybe he's on vacation. I guess Astro is named after Astro Park, but that should be explained. It's nice that Elroy and his friends are staying positive instead of moping because they always come in last. I guess it's unrealistic for kids though. They start training for the events, and he somehow feels the need to remind them that the space ball is programmed to avoid being hit, and the first to hit it wins. The two boys hit each other on the heads, but at least it's with things with padded stuff on the ends of them. Then they get expected to throw javelins at a target and somehow hit his car. George lowers the gravity, and the kids have to use devices they're wearing on their chests to control their jumps up and down. A long time later, George drives up to a place with a darker sky and finds out they used too much anti-gravity. At least there aren't any stars in the background, but I bet I'm still expected to think they went to space. So it's stupid that they survived without a way to create astronaut suits around themselves. After they start swimming and George doesn't know where one of them is, George jumps into the water. And even though his eyes are open when he gets pulled out of it, they somehow still think he needs CPR. Luckily, we don't really see that, and it turns out Phil was being insanely stupid by staying underwater for fun and bragging that he's great at holding his breath. I would say nobody could be that stupid, but sadly I know that's not true. George thanks his son for saving him, and on the day of the Jamboree, George is glad to see the alien Boy Scouts, saying they're coming together in friendship. which is convenient of him to say after he didn't think of aliens as people earlier. Some of them waste time pointing out that Elroy's troop is the worst. Elroy's wise enough to be carefree about this, and George reassures him with something he really shouldn't believe for real. After we see a few panels where they suck, which aren't interesting to see because we already saw exactly how they'd suck, somehow when George gets hit by a javelin, he only got a bruise. Elroy apologizes, and George gets told to come over to the bridge where there was an accident. One of the kids sunk to the bottom of a deep river, and one of Elroy's friends swings by on a rope hanging from a tree to save one of the kids in the river, while Phil dives long enough to rescue the other one, and Elroy saves him by hitting his back again. Once again, I have to assume he did this after doing compression on his chest. So the story ends with them all getting special medals because of their Chekhov's gun skills. And George isn't secure enough to feel bad that he didn't get a medal. The story starts out so stupidly. It doesn't even try to explain how a spacequake is possible. Because the mall floor is opening up beneath their feet, it should just be called an earthquake. But I don't know why that happened on a little artificial planetoid with an artificial atmosphere. Because earthquakes happen because of the movement of tectonic plates it wouldn't have. Jay thinks they'll be lost in space, which makes no sense at all, and Judy says the earthquake is pulling the mall away from its orbit around to the Earth. It's weird that Elroy thinks it's cool when they're all in danger, and it's not like he's capable enough to have a good reason to think he'll survive to justify that attitude, like Rick or Sonic. And there's anti-gravity candy being sold behind them. Then it cuts back in time to Elroy being punished for his grades sucking. I don't see why his grades would suck when he was able to make inventions and programs in the show and make a working spacecraft in the 60s comic. And he had amazing grades in the show. He's forbidden from going to the mall to play video games for 6 months. I guess he means the arcade. Unless he's not a genius in this comic, this is stupid. He freaks out, but it's not like he was forbidden from playing games at home. There's no reason the future would only have video games at the mall. He can't handle it, seeming out of character for comedy, because I don't remember him being a brat like this in the show. His family show they love him by saying he looks so innocent when he sleeps. He cleverly pretends to be asleep to get the family off his back so he can go to the mall. I can't blame him for wanting to have fun. Judy's there to conveniently tell her family right away where he went because she was just at the mall. So the family goes there to find him, with George smartly planning for the family to split up to search more of the mall in a short amount of time, as opposed to simply going to the arcade, because where else would he go? They're ridiculously lucky by finding Elroy the instant they head into the mall. Elroy says he knows the mall a lot better than him, and Astro picks him up by the overalls. And Elroy lampshades the dog being more loyal to George than him for no actual reason, considering it's his dog. Then the part of the ground the mall is on breaks off from an earthquake, and there's no explanation. The dome starts breaking, making them worry they'll run out of air, and they get really unlucky by being threatened by space pirates who shoot at the ground with a laser. This escalated quickly. The pirates want to enslave them, and it's unusual but brave of Jane to make a comment about what she'll never do, when it looks like there's no chance of her getting out of this. George tells Elroy to make it to the ledge and jump down to the next level to get some help. You'd think he'd just get injured that way. But maybe he thinks it'll be worth it because he'll tell people to help them anyways. But then Elroy wakes up, and it turns out it was all a dream instead of being exciting, because now the comic has logic. So the story ends with them not only planning to study, but telling George to extend his 6-month ban to a year, which he'd never say. If he doesn't want to go to the mall because he had a bad dream about it, he would just tell them to not take him to the mall because he had a bad dream about it. At least it being a dream justifies the spacequake happening. So it's actually okay that didn't make sense. I think Elroy wouldn't need any convincing to study because he's supposed to be a genius. These comics made me look up his TV tropes section to see if I'm remembering him wrong. It's so lame to make him not a genius in the comics, because it could have made them more interesting. Even if I get why they would, it's totally unrealistic that a 7-year-old could be that much of a genius. and the series is trying to be a prediction of our planet's future, so it makes sense to have it be a bit more grounded. The Jetsons, Archie, Issue 6. George thinks the first artificial winter environment is great as he's standing just outside of his house, even though this means he has to suck up the snow with the vacuum. So I'm wondering why this was ever in demand to the point of being done for the whole town. Instead of being told that, we see people who want to get rich soon break into the building with the weather machine, and the one with the cyborg arm turns the lever all the way up. It's about time we see a cyborg in the Jetsons. But there's no way he'd have to settle for a claw-shaped artificial hand, let alone an arm that doesn't have fake skin to disguise it when it's so far into the future. But maybe those are too expensive. Someone says they'll put the lever back again, and the other one says that won't happen if he uses his ray gun to blow off the engaging armature sprocket, making a wild assumption that doing so won't destroy the machine, or at least make it non-functional without being destroyed. How does he even know how to refer to it? Lucky for them, his assumption that only the thing he aimed at was weak enough to be damaged was right. He did this to make a blizzard so he could rob empty banks while everyone's stranded by the storm, even though they won't be empty because bank tellers and security guards are there 24/7. It's the future. They'd have robots doing the night shift to guard it, even if bank tellers and security guards aren't replaced by robots. And besides, the cameras would catch them anyways, so they'd better have a good disguise. When someone at government headquarters discovers the damage to the machine, George gets sent over and asked if he could replace it or turn it off. But he can't because the professor used lockout codes. So he decides to drive off to find the professor, as I'm wondering why nobody caught the thieves on camera. He's told the entire universe depends on him, which is completely ridiculous, as obviously the weather would be restricted to Earth. And they both should know that. Elroy snarks at the news to tell him something he doesn't know, and it's entertaining that he wastes time thanking him for doing so. I like this comic's sense of humor. It sure is inconvenient that the professor turned off his communicator for no reason. George thinks the obviously terraformed Jupiter is lovely this time of year. Why this time of year? How would all of it at once be amazing on a specific time of year when it's a huge planet? Elroy goes to the First Universal Bank because he assumes the bad guys will go here eventually. And George drives away from a floating space island with an amusement park and says the terraformed Saturn is having a ring toss contest. One of the criminals says the spaceship they're in has a snow melting beam, and they're the only ones who can see well enough to drive. And then when they go to the bank Elroy's in, he surprises them from behind with Astro holding a ray gun. He should just shoot them right now. Talking's only gonna reveal that he's a kid and make them stop taking him seriously. And I hate that Astro's scared. With the other comics, I'm used to him biting at the drop of a hat, even biting George. But now he's a coward just to rip off Scooby-Doo. The bad guy turns around when he could have very easily not done so. And I have to assume that's because he assumed because it's a kid's voice that the kid didn't have the guts to bring a real weapon. Even though that's a violation of common sense. And his risky assumption worked out because he found out it was a toy gun. But Elroy should have fired it the second he moved. So the criminals run after the kid, who is stupid enough to come here unarmed, and didn't even bring a form of stun gun that he could have made himself. Astro picks him up and carries him while running away on his hind legs. I always hate how he's doing that in this comic. It's never explained, and somehow nobody thinks it's weird. George goes to the professor's summer home on the obviously terraformed Mercury, and gets told to pull the plug on the weather machine. I'm glad he's super embarrassed that he never thought of that. I guess nobody saw the plug. But you'd think the people who called George in would have seen it and pulled it, instead of this whole plot happening because someone ignored the obvious solution. George looks like an idiot by telling him to smile because he's on candid camera, when he doesn't have any sort of camera crew with him and is all alone clearly. Which makes it obvious he didn't think of that solution and is lying. The criminals corner Elroy and Astro because they've seen their faces, And Elroy says they do have weapons, but considers snowballs to be weapons. Astro throws them insanely fast, making me wish Elroy was doing it with robot arms from his back instead. Or at least was explained to have given Astro super speed. George pulls the plug. Somehow the criminals give up because they're covered in snow they could stand out of. And the police show up on floating schooners and tell Elroy good job. He thanks them, and Jane somehow only gives George and Elroy the credit before Astro growls at her. So he gets a compliment, pet, and apology. George wastes time giving Jane technobabble just to tell her what he really did because she asks him what he meant. And that was the only answer he could think of right away. In the next story, the dishwasher starts shooting out the dishes and silverware as if that's a possible malfunction. And Jane's headphones are too loud because her Walkman's screwing up. And Elroy thinks he's got a problem too when I can't tell what that is. And Rosie's head came loose. George is expected to be able to fix all of those complicated machines. And he's so selfish that he'd rather keep watching TV, even though the dishwasher could have easily killed Jane. The TV explodes, and somehow he gets harmlessly sent flying upwards with just soot on him. Elroy tells him his hologlasses need adjustment. He would have heard Jane screaming and the dishes breaking, so there's no way he would ever help Elroy first when her life is on the line. At least as long as she keeps being stupid enough to be in front of it. Somehow the hologlasses let him hear what his appliances are somehow saying, when 1, they aren't about the sense of hearing, and 2, the maker of the appliances had no reason to make them sentient when that'd be a lot of work just to give them a boring, cruel existence where they can barely move. It's something only a sadist would program. It's too bad I have to just assume that their immense boredom at being stationary slaves is why they're evil. But there's mostly paralyzed people in real life who aren't like that. So the mad scientist who gave them sentience must have made them evil on purpose. But there's no reason he would have gone through that work. Why does the toaster call Jane Mom if he still thinks her suffering is funny when he'd know her real name by now? George naturally questions this and sadly doesn't get told why. Instead he's called an idiot, which is cathartic at this point. As I wonder if the hologlasses are just making him have a bad dream, somehow all of the appliances block the door, when they'd only be able to move if a mad scientist altered them to make them able to in a bid to take over the world. And this is the exact plan Eggman did in Sonic X. The writer's clearly just venting about his appliances here, because he has the phone say, the plan was to always break down when you needed us most. I still want to know why they want to drive humanity insane, when it's what made them and provides them with entertainment. They should know how boring life would be without them. He's told he'll be killed because he knows too much, and gets trapped by the bed which spits him out. He crashes through a window and somehow doesn't get injured by it, so I wish he didn't get sent through one at all. George points out that he'd make a great slave, and tells him he's paid their electric bills for years. I have to assume they don't appreciate it because they hate being alive. He also says Baisley's much harder on his appliances, and offers to give them his home address, which is at least a clever plan earning some respect, provided that he can get a new job. Even if it's trying to portray him as a jerk. It's smart of him to try talking them out of killing him with some really good points. Rosie tells him to follow her, and he says he's glad to see her, so I don't trust her at all. Of course, she says this has to end now, and apologizes for no reason considering that she takes off his glasses and reveals that he was watching a movie the whole time. That doesn't explain why he was running around without being aware that he was just lying still the whole time. And it doesn't explain why she looked mad either. But then the story ends with Rosie telling the hologlasses to never pull a stunt like that again. So he really was evil. And the appliances hate Rosie for being nice, and I'm still wishing I was told why. In the next story, Judy walks off with her current boyfriend, with her mom telling them to have a great time. And George decides to spy on Judy's date at the amusement park. It's absolutely forced that he not only did nothing to hide his distinctive hair and haircut, but brought Astro, making it go from sort of obvious that he's him, to blatantly obvious the second Judy would happen to look at him at a moment's notice. The writer forgot this is the future. He could have had a cloaking device around him and not looked like an idiot. But then there'd be no tension, and that's what makes this engaging. George thinks he has to go on every ride they go on to spy on them, and he has a miserable time while at least Astro's enjoying himself. There's no way they'd let a dog on the ride. For no reason they get flung up in the air when that never happened, and crash through the roof of a hot dog stand. At least Astro gets to enjoy eating hot dogs. Judy flies with a jetpack, and the goal of the ride is that whoever stays away from the flying robot the longest wins a prize. There's absolutely no reason there'd be a killer dog switch on the robot in the first place. As if it's not dumb enough that it got activated for no reason. This clearly wasn't necessary. I already thought the robot was gonna scare George as it was by chasing him. That'd have been fine. And I'm supposed to believe Astro was able to turn the robot into a 6-pack of soda. That's it, the writer's not even trying to make this believable. Speaking of that, when they go down the slide out of the place, the guard says good riddance when he has no reason to side with the robot dog he was just against a second ago. George bounces off a kid and eventually sees Judy in one of the floating bumper cars. He jumps into the bumper car of a woman, and Judy instantly assumes he's here to cheat on his wife, even though he's upside down. So it's obvious he just got there. How does she have so little faith in him? She's the one who needs a trust lesson. We know nothing about Judy's boyfriend. Judy crashes into him on purpose as the woman commits assault, hitting him with her purse, because she's the type to hit first and ask questions later, which I hope gets her charged and arrested. If she was a man and he was a woman, she would get in trouble because you wouldn't think a man would be justified in hurting someone just for trying to sit next to him. She should have waited. We never get to see if she got hurt from the fall they took, unfortunately. Instead it cuts to George going back to his apartment door, with Astro having stolen stuff from the amusement park that they'd never give a dog. The door's locked, and his horrible excuse for a wife calls him a womanizer and expects him to sleep in a motel tonight, totally taking Judy at her word for it, with the only mercy being that she's gonna let him explain tomorrow. If she's like this, why would she let him explain at all? Somehow, literally all of his family assumes he was trying to cheat on her. When sure he's selfish, but that's quite a leap. And if she's like this, I wouldn't blame him. This was supposed to be funny because George wonders where his family gets being untrusting from. If George treated Jane like this, everyone would be able to tell how abusive and toxic this is. I know it looked like George was cheating on her, but I'm pretty sure good relationships are supposed to have people trust each other. The first story is a rehash of a previous Jetsons comic, where George is a door-to-door salesman on an alien planet, with even less happening in the plot, constrained to one setting now. But it's because he lost his job, and because the thing he's selling is impossibly faulty when it wouldn't be sold like that. So he ends up taking advantage of it on the second try to save a kid who was pinned down by a car. This gets the guy who gave up on Spacely to give him another chance because of a very unlikely coincidence. So I'm glad there are Chekhov's guns and Spacely got to suffer in the end, even if I should have seen it. The second story is about George conveniently being able to train Elroy's Boy Scout troop despite having a job, as if this is his job instead in this universe. But they all suck. And the only thing interesting is that the story keeps being sci-fi by having the Spaceball be programmed to try to avoid getting hit. Otherwise, it's just them bailing at generic worthless camp activities until they end up saving some kids underwater because of the skills they showed earlier when George conveniently let them go swimming just for fun. The third story is Elroy get banned from the mall by George because of something that would never happen, and have a dream about going there anyways, only for an impossible spacequake and the real threat of lasers shooting pirates to happen. And I was thinking that I didn't actually mind that kind of tone. It sure escalated quickly out of nowhere, but it was still lame that it turned out to be a dream. It being a dream only works out because it justifies the spacequake, but that never needed to happen when they're going to leave the mall anyways. But at least the dream has Elroy decide to study, but I'd expect him to always want to study enough because he's supposed to be unusually smart. Why are these comics lying to you that he's just a normal kid? The first story is about criminals making a weather machine cause an out-of-control blizzard so they could get people stranded at home and rob the inexplicably empty banks. And this happens because somehow there is demands for it to start snowing in the city artificially. So it's an idiot's plot. Elroy's brave enough to go to a bank and threaten the criminals with a toy gun, but instead he gets chased and Astro pelts them with snowballs, with no explanation for how he can do it so fast that they give up by the time the police get to them. Meanwhile, all George had to do was pull the plug on the weather machine, which would have been tried right away. So it's a good thing it was such an engaging and creative story that it was worth it being so contrived. The second story is George put on Elroy's malfunctioning hollow glasses, even though the dishwasher is throwing all of the dishes and breaking them right now. So either he doesn't care about Jane in this universe, or this is another idiot plot. And it gives him a nightmare about all of the appliances trying to kill him for simply knowing they're alive. Then Rosie pulls them off him, revealing that it never happened, and I have to wonder why she took so long. It's too bad I just have to assume the appliances are evil and sentient purely because they're made by a jerk. I guess his wife divorced him and he was in a bad mood. Why in the world was there an ending that implied that it wasn't all just a dream? The third story was about the writer torturing George, having him get inexplicable slapstick in an amusement park all day because he somehow decided to waste time trying to spy on Judy's date, when the only reason he wouldn't trust her boyfriend would be that he'd be worried she'd get knocked up, and obviously he's not going to try to do that at an amusement park during the day. Why would he get on the rides if he doesn't want to? This is an idiot plot too, but this one doesn't even work. And the ending really pissed me off. His family having no excuse for having so little faith in him. Jane shouldn't have a husband if she's like this. At least not this version of Jane. I thought it'd just be a story where he goes on regular amusement park rides and has a normal time. Well, it won't be as interesting to see and write. At least it won't be outright sadistic and nonsensical and stay in the realm of reality where it belongs.